Before we begin this tale of hidden identity and persistent devotion, tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I love knowing where my listeners are joining me. The rain fell in steady sheets across the moorlands of Yorkshire, turning the narrow roads to rivers of mud and the distant hills to mere suggestions beneath the grey November sky. Inside the modest cottage that served as the village schoolhouse, Miss Bridget Shaw stood before a cluttered desk, her ink-stained fingers sorting through copybooks with the practiced efficiency of one who had performed the same task 1,000 times before. The children had departed an hour ago, their voices fading into the mist like ghosts, leaving behind only the smell of damp wool and chalk dust. She was 32 years old, though the lines of care around her eyes might have suggested more, and she wore the plain dark dress of a schoolmistress, with neither adornment nor apology. Her chestnut hair, threaded with premature silver, was pulled severely back from a face that might once have been called handsome, but now bore the marks of years spent in careful invisibility. She had lived in the village of Thornwick for 7 years, arriving on a winter evening, much like this one, with nothing but a small trunk and a letter of recommendation from a vicar whose parish lay so distant that no one had thought to verify its authenticity. The villagers had accepted her without question, grateful for anyone willing to educate their children for the meagre salary the parish could afford. She asked for nothing, troubled no one, and maintained a dignity that discouraged familiarity without breeding resentment. Miss Shaw was exactly what she appeared to be, a woman of modest means and unremarkable history, seeking only to earn her bread in peace, or so they believed. The knock at the schoolhouse door came just as Bridget was fastening her cloak, preparing to walk the 1/4 mile to the small room she rented above the draper's shop. She started at the sound, her hand flying to her throat in a gesture so fleeting that had anyone observed it, they might have thought it merely surprise, rather than the flash of deep-seated fear it truly was. Visitors at this hour were unusual, and in the 7 years of her residence here, Bridget had learned to be wary of the unusual. She opened the door to find a man standing in the rain, tall and imposing, despite the water streaming from the brim of his hat. His clothing, though travel-worn and mud-spattered, spoke of quality and wealth, the cut of his greatcoat precise, the leather of his gloves supple even as they darkened with moisture. He was perhaps 40, with dark hair silvering at the temples, and eyes of such penetrating grey that Bridget felt exposed under their gaze, as though he could see through the careful construction of 7 years in a single glance. "Forgive the intrusion," he said, his voice cultured and deep, carrying the authority of one accustomed to being heard and obeyed. "I am searching for the schoolmistress. Miss Shaw, I believe?" Bridget's heart hammered against her ribs, but her face remained composed, the mask she had perfected through years of practice settling over her features like a familiar garment. "I am she," she replied, her own voice carefully neutral, stripped of the educated accent that had once been hers by birth. "How may I assist you, sir?" He studied her in silence for a moment that stretched until it became uncomfortable, his gaze travelling over her face, with an intensity that made her wish to step back into the shadows. Then he removed his hat, revealing more clearly the strong features and the weariness that lined them. "My name is Alexander Mowbray, Duke of Ravenswood," he said, and Bridget felt the world tilt beneath her feet, though she did not move. "I have come a very long way to find you, Lady Diana." The name hung in the air between them like an accusation, like a key turning in a lock that had remained sealed for 7 years. Bridget's fingers tightened on the doorframe, the only outward sign of the tumult his words had unleashed within her. "I fear you are mistaken, Your Grace," she said, her voice steady despite the roaring in her ears. "There is no one of that name here. I am Miss Bridget Shaw, and I have been the schoolmistress of Thornwick for 7 years. Perhaps you seek someone in another village." The Duke's expression did not change, but something in his eyes, a flicker of pain or disappointment, suggested her denial had wounded him in a way he had not expected. "I have been searching for 7 years," he said quietly. I have travelled to every corner of England and beyond, following rumours and whispers and the faintest threads of possibility. I have looked into 1,000 faces, hoping to find the one that haunts my memory. Do you truly expect me to accept that I am mistaken now, when I finally stand before you? The rain continued to fall, drumming against the roof and forming puddles in the dooryard. Bridget became aware that they stood in a tableau that would invite comment should anyone pass by. The Duke of Ravenswood, on her threshold, his bearing unmistakable even in his dishevelled state. "Your Grace, you are wet and clearly weary from travel," she said, stepping back with reluctance. "You may wait inside while I fetch the vicar. He can direct you to more suitable lodgings, and perhaps help you locate the person you seek." She turned away as she spoke, unable to meet his gaze any longer, but his voice stopped her. "Diana." Just that, her true name spoken with such certainty and such longing that it pierced through every defence she had constructed. She closed her eyes, her back still to him, and felt the weight of 7 years pressing down upon her shoulders. 7 years of hiding, of carefully constructed lies, of becoming someone else so thoroughly that she had almost convinced herself Bridget Shaw was real and Lady Diana Hartwell had died in the carriage, accident that had claimed her parents and left her alone in the world at 25. 7 years of believing that no one searched, no one remembered, no one cared enough to look beyond the official story of her death. "Why?" she whispered, the word escaping before she could recall it. "Why have you searched?" She heard him step into the schoolhouse, heard the door close behind him, shutting out the sound of rain and the possibility of retreat. "Because I made a promise," he said, and something in his voice made her turn to face him at last. "Because the woman I knew, the woman I loved, would not have vanished without reason. Because I could not accept that the world had simply swallowed you whole and left no trace." Bridget Diana, the woman caught between 2 names and 2 lives, stared at him across the dim interior of the schoolhouse. She remembered him now, though he had changed in the years since she had last seen him. Alexander Mowbray had been a friend of her father's, a frequent visitor to Hartwell Manor, and she had been a girl of 24 when he had last dined at their table, discussing politics and philosophy with her father, while she poured tea and listened. She had thought him handsome then, in a distant way, the way one might admire a painting or a statue, something fine but untouchable. She had not known he noticed her beyond the cursory attention a man of his standing might grant his friend's daughter. "You barely knew me," she said, her voice hollow. "We spoke perhaps a dozen times in as many years. Why would you promise anything on my behalf?" Alexander moved closer, his tall frame seeming to fill the small schoolhouse, and she saw that his face bore signs of the 7 years that had passed, new lines around his eyes and mouth, a weariness that spoke of sleepless nights and disappointments endured. "The night before the accident," he said, "your father and I dined together in London. He told me he had received threats, that enemies from his banking ventures had made it clear they would stop at nothing to ruin him. He asked me to watch over you should anything happen to him. I gave him my word." He paused, and his voice dropped lower. "What I did not tell him was that I had already determined to do so regardless, because in those dozen conversations over as many years, I had come to recognize in you a woman of remarkable intelligence and strength, and I had formed an attachment that went well beyond duty or obligation." Diana felt her carefully constructed world crumbling like a wall of sand before the tide. "The accident," she began, then stopped, unsure how much to reveal. "There was no accident," Alexander said flatly. "Or rather, it was no accident at all. Your father's carriage was forced off the road, the axle deliberately weakened, the horses spooked by design. Both your parents died, but when I arrived at the scene, drawn by news of the tragedy, there was no body found for you. The authorities concluded you had been thrown into the river and swept away, but I knew better. I knew you were clever enough to escape if you could, and desperate enough to hide if you believed yourself in danger." Diana sank into the chair behind her desk, her legs no longer willing to support her. "You knew," she breathed. "All this time you knew." I suspected, he corrected, pulling a chair close and sitting so that they were eye to eye, no longer separated by the barrier of his height or her carefully maintained distance. I could not prove it, and I dared not speak of it too openly, lest I draw the attention of those who had murdered your parents. But I searched. I followed every whisper of a woman fitting your description who had appeared in some remote village. I investigated every new governess, every shopkeeper's assistant, every charitable woman who seemed to have no past. I nearly found you a dozen times, only to discover it was someone else. Someone who resembled you but lacked that particular quality I would have recognized anywhere. What quality? She asked, though part of her feared the answer. Alexander reached across the space between them and took her ink-stained hand in his, the gesture so unexpected and so intimate that she gasped. The way you hold yourself, he said quietly, as though even in the plainest dress, even in the most humble circumstances, you remember that you are descended from a line that has maintained its honor for 500 years. The way you speak, even when you try to disguise your accent, with a precision that reveals extensive education. The way you move, with a grace that no amount of deliberate awkwardness can fully conceal. But most of all, the way your eyes reflect intelligence and compassion in equal measure, a combination I have never encountered in any other woman. Diana felt tears burning behind her eyes, though she refused to let them fall. You are mistaken in your estimation, she said, attempting to withdraw her hand, though he held it gently but firmly. I am a schoolmistress, with no past worth noting, and no future beyond these walls. Lady Diana Hartwell died 7 years ago, and I have no wish to resurrect her. Why? Alexander asked, the single word weighted with genuine confusion and concern. Why choose this existence when you could reclaim your rightful place, your inheritance, your name? Diana did look away then, her gaze travelling to the window where rain still streaked the glass, turning the world beyond into a watercolour of greys and browns. Because Lady Diana's rightful place, as you call it, made her a target, she said, each word carefully measured. Because her inheritance was the reason her parents were murdered. Because her name carried expectations and obligations that nearly destroyed what remained of her spirit after she crawled from that overturned carriage, after she hid in the river reeds while men searched for her with torches and weapons, after she walked through the night until her feet bled, knowing that to be Diana, Hartwell was to be marked for death. The silence that followed was broken only by the steady rhythm of rain and the distant call of a bird settling for the night. Alexander's hand remained over hers, warm and solid, an anchor in the storm of memories she had fought so hard to suppress. I could protect you, he said finally. With my name, my title, my resources, no one would dare harm you. You could return to London, to society, to the life that was stolen from you. Diana shook her head slowly. You speak of a life I no longer want, Your Grace. I have built something here, something small but real. I teach children who would otherwise grow up unable to read or write. I have a purpose that has nothing to do with bloodlines or bank accounts or the machinations of powerful men. Why would I trade that for a return to a world that took everything from me? Because it is yours by right, he replied, his voice taking on an edge of frustration. Because those who wronged you should not be allowed to profit from their crimes. Because running and hiding is not the same as living, no matter how noble the work you do here. She pulled her hand from his then, rising from her chair and moving to stand by the window, her arms wrapped around herself as though to hold together pieces that might otherwise scatter. And what would you have me do? She asked without turning. Return to London and announce that Lady Diana Hartwell has miraculously survived. Do you not think that those who killed my parents would simply try again, and this time ensure their success? Do you not understand that I choose this life not out of cowardice but out of a desire to survive? Alexander rose as well, and she could see his reflection in the window glass, a dark figure moving to stand behind her, though he did not touch her. I have spent 7 years preparing for this moment, he said, his voice low and intense. 7 years investigating your father's business dealings, tracking the network of corruption that led to his murder, building a case that would bring his killers to justice. I am not asking you to return unprotected, Diana. I am asking you to trust me when I say that the threat against you can be neutralized, that your enemies can be brought to account, that you can reclaim your life without fear. She watched his reflection, saw the determination in the set of his shoulders and the weariness around his eyes. Why? She asked again, the question that seemed to lie at the heart of everything. Why have you done all this for a woman you barely knew, for a promise made to a dead man? In the window's reflection, she saw Alexander's expression shift, saw something vulnerable break through the stern facade he had maintained. Because in those dozen conversations, he said quietly, you spoke to me not as a duke, but as a man. You challenged my opinions, shared your own thoughts on matters of philosophy and justice, and treated me as an equal in intellectual discourse, something precious few people in my position ever experience. Because I found myself thinking of those conversations in idle moments, anticipating my next visit to Hartwell Manor with an eagerness that had nothing to do with your father's company and everything to do with yours. He paused, and she saw him draw a breath, as though preparing for a leap from which there could be no return. Because when news of the accident reached me, I felt as though something vital had been torn from my life, and when I discovered the circumstances suggested murder rather than misfortune, I could not rest until I knew what had become of you. Because I have spent 7 years searching, and in all that time I have met countless women who society would deem more beautiful, more accomplished, more suitable, and yet not one of them has displaced you from my thoughts. Diana closed her eyes, pressing her forehead against the cool glass of the window. You speak of an attachment formed 7 years ago based on a handful of conversations, she said, her voice barely audible. You do not know the woman I have become, the ways in which hardship and fear have changed me. I am not the innocent girl who poured tea in her father's drawing room. I can see that, Alexander replied, and now he did touch her, his hand coming to rest lightly on her shoulder, the warmth of it seeping through the fabric of her dress. I can see the strength you have developed, the resilience that allowed you to build a new life from nothing. I can see the compassion that leads you to dedicate yourself to educating children who have so little. These are not changes that diminish you, Diana. They are qualities that make you even more remarkable than the woman I remember. She turned to face him then, and the movement brought them closer than propriety would normally allow in the confined space of the schoolhouse. And if I refuse, she asked, searching his face, if I choose to remain Bridget Shaw, to continue teaching in this village, to never return to the life I left behind. Something flickered in Alexander's grey eyes, disappointment perhaps, or pain, but his voice remained steady. Then I will respect your choice, he said. I will not force you to be someone you no longer wish to be, but I ask only that you consider the possibility that you might reclaim your identity without sacrificing the life you have built, that being Lady Diana and being a teacher of children need not be mutually exclusive, that justice for your parents might be worth the risk of emerging from hiding. He reached into his coat and withdrew a leather portfolio, offering it to her. These are the documents I have compiled, evidence of the conspiracy that led to your parents' deaths, names of those involved, and testimony I have gathered over the years. Read them, if you will. See for yourself that I do not ask you to step blindly into danger, but to consider a path forward that might bring closure to the past while allowing you to shape your future as you choose. Diana took the portfolio with trembling hands, feeling the weight of it both physical and metaphorical. I cannot give you an answer tonight, she said. This is too much to comprehend all at once. I would not expect otherwise, Alexander replied. I have taken a room at the inn, such as it is. I will remain in Thornwick for as long as you require to consider what I have told you. There is no rush, Diana. I have waited 7 years. I can wait longer if needed. He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the latch. There is one thing more I should tell you, he said, without turning. In all my searching, in all the villages I have visited and all the women I have investigated, I have never stopped hoping that I would find you. Not because of the promise I made to your father, but because the prospect of a world without you in it, even hidden and unknown to me, felt insupportable. Whatever you decide, whatever name you choose to bear, know that my regard for you has not diminished with time or distance, and that should you ever need my protection or assistance, you have but to ask, and I will come. With that, he stepped out into the rain, leaving Diana alone in the schoolhouse, with the portfolio clutched to her chest and her carefully constructed world in ruins around her. She stood motionless for a long time, listening to the rain and trying to organize the chaos of her thoughts. 7 years of believing herself forgotten, of assuming that Lady Diana Hartwell's death had been accepted without question, of building a new identity from determination and necessity, and now to discover that someone had searched, that Alexander Mowbray had spent those same 7 years refusing to accept her loss, methodically working to make her return possible. The implications were staggering, overwhelming, impossible to fully comprehend in a single evening. That night, in her small room above the draper's shop, Diana lit a candle and opened the portfolio. What she found within confirmed everything Alexander had told her and revealed much that she had not known. Her father's banking business had uncovered a network of fraud extending to the highest levels of government and industry, men who had embezzled fortunes and used their positions to hide their crimes. When Lord Hartwell had threatened to expose them, they had responded with murder, making it appear an accident and ensuring that any evidence he might have compiled died with him. But Alexander had picked up the thread her father had dropped, and over 7 years had woven a case so comprehensive that it left no room for doubt or escape. The men responsible were named, their crimes documented, their attempts to cover their tracks meticulously exposed. More than that, Alexander had secured allies in Parliament and the courts, men of integrity who had agreed to pursue justice once Diana came forward to provide the final piece of evidence, her testimony as a witness to the circumstances of her parents' deaths and her own survival. As dawn light began to filter through her small window, Diana closed the portfolio and sat in silence, weighing her choices. She could remain Bridget Shaw, safe in her anonymity, teaching her students and living her quiet life, knowing that her parents' murderers continued to prosper and that justice would never be served. Or she could reclaim her identity, step back into a world she had fled in terror, and trust that Alexander's preparations would protect her while her testimony helped bring her enemies to account. The question that troubled her most was not about justice or safety, but about the man himself. Alexander had spoken of attachment and regard, of 7 years spent searching, of an inability to forget or move on. Yet what did such feelings mean after so much time and distance? Was it possible to form a genuine connection with someone based on memories and hope, rather than present reality? She thought of the way he had looked at her, not with the pity she had sometimes encountered when her students' parents regarded the unmarried schoolmistress, nor with the dismissiveness that society often showed women of her advancing years and modest station, but with a combination of relief and wonder that suggested he truly had been searching for her, specifically, and not merely fulfilling an obligation. The memory of his hand on hers, warm and solid, rose unbidden in her mind. She tried to dismiss it as a moment of intensity in an overwhelming conversation, but the sensation lingered, along with the quiet authority in his voice when he had spoken her true name. 3 days passed before Diana sought Alexander out at the inn. She found him in the small private parlour, sitting before a fire with a book in his hands, though his gaze was distant and unfocused when she entered. He rose immediately at the sight of her, the book falling forgotten to the floor. "Diana," he said, and she noticed that he did not call her Miss Shaw, that he had determined to address her by her true name, regardless of the identity she maintained for the village. "I have read your documents," she said without preamble, remaining near the door, though he gestured for her to sit. "They are thorough and damning. I can see that you have built a strong case." "But," he prompted, reading hesitation in her posture, "but I have questions before I can make a decision." She moved further into the room, though she did not sit, instead standing near the window much as she had in the schoolhouse. "If I return to London, if I provide testimony and reclaim my identity, what then? Do you imagine I will simply resume the life I left behind, attending balls and seeking a suitable husband as though 7 years have not passed?" Alexander's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "I imagine you will do as you choose," he replied carefully. "Your inheritance is substantial, Diana. You will be a wealthy woman, in your own right, with no need to depend on anyone for your security or future. You could maintain a household in London or the country. You could continue your teaching if you wished. You could travel or study or pursue any endeavor that interests you. The choice would be entirely yours." "And you?" she asked, turning to face him directly. "What role do you envision for yourself in this future you have planned?" He held her gaze, and she saw him weighing his words before speaking. "I would hope to be your friend," he said at last. "Perhaps, if you were willing, something more. But I am not asking you to return to London for my sake, Diana. I am asking because I believe you deserve justice for your parents and freedom from the fear that has shaped your life these past 7 years. Whatever personal hopes I might harbor are secondary to that." Diana studied his face, searching for deception or ulterior motive and finding none. "You speak of hopes," she said quietly. "Be plain with me, Alexander. What is it you want?" She watched emotions flicker across his features, saw the moment when he made his own decision to abandon careful restraint in favor of honesty. "I want," he said, his voice low but firm, "to court you properly, to call upon you, to engage in the conversations I have missed for 7 years, to learn who you have become while sharing with you who I have remained. I want the opportunity to demonstrate that the attachment I formed based on a dozen conversations can deepen into something lasting and true when given the chance to develop naturally. I want to be the man you turn to when you need support, or companionship, or simply someone who sees you as you truly are." He paused, then added with quiet intensity, "But most of all, I want you to be safe and free to make your own choices without fear or constraint. If that means you choose a life that does not include me beyond friendship or professional acquaintance, I will accept it with grace. I have not spent 7 years searching for you only to claim you as a prize, Diana. I have searched because a world in which you exist, even if you despise me or remain forever beyond my reach, is infinitely preferable to one in which you have been erased." The word struck something deep within Diana, something she had thought destroyed by hardship and loss. She had spent 7 years believing herself forgotten, convincing herself that her death had been accepted with the mild regret accorded to acquaintances rather than loved ones. To discover that Alexander had refused to forget, that he had methodically worked to make her return possible while harboring hopes of a personal connection, challenged every assumption she had made about her own worth and desirability. "I am 32 years old," she said, voicing the concern that had troubled her as she read through the documents he had provided. "By society's measure, I am long past the age when marriage is expected or even appropriate. The men who sought my hand when I was 24 have long since married others and started their families. Why would you, a duke with your choice of younger, more suitable women, want to court someone society deems firmly on the shelf?" Alexander crossed the space between them, moving with a deliberation that gave her time to retreat if she wished. She did not. He stopped close enough that she could see the fine lines around his eyes, marks of 7 years spent searching, and the silver threading through his dark hair. "Because I am 40 years old," he said, "and in all that time I have met no one who engaged my mind and heart as you did. Because I find the idea of courting a woman who has lived and learned and developed strength through adversity far more appealing than pursuing a young girl who knows nothing of the world's realities. Because when I imagine my future, the woman at the center of it has chestnut hair, with threads of silver, ink stains on her fingers from teaching children to write, and eyes that have seen hardship but retain their capacity for compassion. He lifted his hand slowly, telegraphing the movement so she could refuse it, and when she did not, he gently tucked a strand of hair that had escaped her severe arrangement behind her ear. I do not want a bride chosen for her youth or her connections, Diana. I want a partner who can challenge my thinking and share my life as an equal. I want the woman who has survived 7 years of exile and emerged with her essential character intact. I want you, if you will have me, at 32 or 52 or 72, because age has nothing to do with the qualities that matter most. Diana felt her breath catch at both his words and his touch, the gentle gesture carrying more intimacy than any previous contact they had shared. "And if I prove disappointing," she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, "if the woman you remember does not match the reality of who I have become?" "Then we will discover that together," he replied simply. "But I do not believe I will be disappointed, Diana. I believe I will find that the woman I glimpsed in those dozen conversations has been refined by experience into someone even more remarkable than I imagined." For a long moment they stood in silence, his hand still hovering near her face, her heart beating so loudly she felt certain he must hear it. Then, with a decisiveness that surprised her, Diana made her choice. "I will return to London," she said. "I will provide testimony against my parents' murderers and reclaim my identity. But I do so on my own terms, Alexander. I will not be rushed into decisions about my future beyond seeing justice done. If you wish to court me, you may do so, but I make no promises about where that courtship might lead. I have built a life as Bridget Shaw that has value and meaning, and I will not discard it entirely to become Lady Diana again." Alexander's face transformed with a smile so genuine and relieved that it made him look years younger. "Those terms are more than acceptable," he said. "All I ask is the opportunity to prove myself worthy of your consideration. The rest will unfold as it should." He stepped back, restoring a proper distance between them, though his eyes remained warm. "When would you like to depart for London? I can arrange for us to travel with appropriate chaperonage and ensure your comfort during the journey." Diana considered, her mind already moving through the practical necessities. "I will need a week to conclude the term with my students and arrange for someone to continue their education in my absence. I will not leave them without preparation or explanation." "Of course," Alexander agreed. "Shall I tell them you are Lady Diana, or would you prefer to maintain your identity as Bridget Shaw?" "I think," Diana said slowly, "that I shall tell them I am both, that I was Diana, became Bridget by necessity, and am now learning to be some synthesis of the two. Children deserve honesty, and mine are clever enough to understand that people sometimes must become someone else in order to survive." Alexander's expression softened further. "You see," he said quietly, "this is precisely why I searched for 7 years. What other woman would think first of her students' welfare and the lessons her story might teach them?" Diana allowed herself a small smile. "A schoolmistress would," she replied, "which is what I am, regardless of what name I carry or what title I might reclaim." The week that followed was both strange and illuminating. Alexander remained in Thornwick, taking lodgings at the modest inn and enduring the villagers' curiosity about the Duke who had appeared so suddenly in their midst. He attended Sunday service at the small church, sat in the back of Diana's classroom one afternoon to observe her teaching, and gradually became a familiar, if still exotic presence in the rural community. Diana watched him interact with her students, saw him listen with genuine interest to their hesitant recitations, and observed the way he treated the innkeeper and the shopkeepers with the same courtesy he would show to peers in London. He was not playing at humility or condescending to the village folk, she realized, but simply treating all people with baseline dignity, regardless of their station. It was a quality she had not expected, and it made her reassess her memories of their past interactions. During the evenings, Alexander called upon her in her small room, properly chaperoned by Mrs. Dawson, the draper's wife, and they spoke for hours about everything and nothing. He told her of his 7 years of searching, of the false trails and disappointments, of the moments when he had nearly given up hope, only to discover some new lead that renewed his determination. She told him of her life as Bridget Shaw, of the satisfaction she found in teaching, of the children who had become dear to her, of the small triumphs and daily struggles of living on a schoolmistress's salary. They discussed books and politics, philosophy and practical matters, discovering that the intellectual connection they had formed years ago not only remained intact, but had deepened with maturity and experience. Diana found herself looking forward to these evening conversations with an anticipation that both pleased and unsettled her. On the final evening before their departure, Alexander arrived with a small wrapped package. "I thought you might appreciate something to mark this moment," he said, offering it to her. "A transition between Bridget and Diana, past and future." Diana unwrapped the package to find a leather-bound journal, its pages blank and waiting. "For recording your observations and thoughts during your return to London," Alexander explained. "Whether you choose to remain Lady Diana or find some way to honour both identities, I thought you might value a space to process the transformation." She ran her fingers over the smooth leather, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Thank you," she said softly. "It is perfect." He smiled, then grew more serious. "Diana, before we leave Thornwick, there is something else I must tell you. Something about my own circumstances that you should know before you commit to allowing me to court you." She looked up from the journal, noting the tension in his posture. "What is it?" "I am not merely a duke with comfortable means," he said carefully. "My family is among the wealthiest in England. The responsibilities of managing such estates and holdings are considerable, and the scrutiny that comes with the position is relentless. If we were to pursue a future together, you would be stepping into a role that demands much and offers little privacy. I would not have you unprepared for that reality." Diana set the journal aside and considered his words. "You think I am naive to the demands of high society?" she asked. "My father was a baron and a successful banker. I grew up understanding the weight of responsibility and the burden of others' expectations. What I rejected 7 years ago was not the principle of duty, but the specific circumstances that made remaining Lady Diana a death sentence." "But still," Alexander pressed, "you have lived simply for 7 years. You have known the freedom of anonymity. Are you prepared to sacrifice that freedom again, this time voluntarily?" Diana rose and moved to stand before him. "I do not know," she admitted honestly. "I do not know if I can be the Duchess society would expect, if I can navigate the social complexities I once fled, if I can balance justice for my parents with rebuilding a life in London. But I am willing to try, Alexander. I am willing to step back into the world I left and see if Diana and Bridget can coexist, if duty and authenticity can be reconciled, if love, should it develop, can thrive under the weight of expectation and obligation." She paused, then added with quiet determination, "What I will not do is hide any longer from fear. I will reclaim my name, provide my testimony, and face whatever consequences follow. And if you wish to court me during that process, I will allow it and see where honest acquaintance leads us. But I make no promises beyond giving you, and myself, a genuine chance." Alexander took her hand, raising it to his lips in a gesture both formal and intimate. "That is all I ask," he said. "A genuine chance, freely given, to discover if what I have felt for 7 years might grow into something mutual and lasting." The journey to London took 3 days, travelling in Alexander's well-appointed carriage with Mrs. Dawson serving as chaperone. Diana watched the landscape change as they moved south, leaving behind the rugged moors of Yorkshire for the gentler hills, and eventually the outskirts of the great city that she had fled 7 years before. With each mile, she felt Bridget Shaw fading and Lady Diana Hartwell emerging, though she was determined that this new Diana would be informed by Bridget's experiences and strength. Alexander proved to be an attentive traveling companion, ensuring Diana's comfort at each posting in and engaging her in conversation that distracted from any nervousness she felt about their destination. He did not press for intimacy beyond the occasional touch of hands or meeting of glances, allowing their connection to deepen naturally through shared proximity and ongoing dialogue. On the third evening, as they approached London proper, Diana sat by the window of their private parlour at the final coaching inn, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. Alexander joined her, standing close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, though they did not touch. "Tomorrow you step back into your past," he observed quietly. "How do you feel?" Diana considered the question honestly. "Frightened," she admitted, "determined, uncertain, but also strangely at peace. For 7 years I have carried the weight of my parents' unavenged deaths and my own cowardice in fleeing rather than fighting. Tomorrow I begin to set that right." "You are not a coward," Alexander said firmly. "You were a young woman who had just witnessed her parents' murder and barely escaped with her own life. There is no shame in surviving, Diana." She turned to look at him, finding his face serious and his eyes filled with conviction. "Do you truly believe that?" she asked. "Or do you say it to comfort me?" "I believe it absolutely," he replied. "I have spent 7 years investigating your enemies, Diana. I know the resources they commanded, the ruthlessness with which they operated. The fact that you survived at all is remarkable. The fact that you built a new life and found purpose in teaching children demonstrates strength of character that few possess. Do not diminish what you accomplished simply because it was not the response others might have expected." His words eased something within her, a knot of guilt and shame she had carried for so long that she had ceased to notice its weight until it began to loosen. "Thank you," she whispered. Alexander reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers, in a gesture that had become familiar over the past week. "Tomorrow," he said, "we will meet with my solicitors and the allies I have cultivated in Parliament. They will guide you through the process of reclaiming your identity and preparing your testimony. I will be with you every step if you wish it." "I wish it," she confirmed, gripping his hand tightly. "I do not think I can face this alone, Alexander." "You are not alone," he assured her. "Not anymore. Whatever happens, whatever challenges arise, I will stand with you. That is my promise, not as a duke fulfilling an obligation, but as a man who has come to care deeply for your well-being and future." They stood together as the sunset faded and darkness crept across the landscape, 2 figures silhouetted against the window, finding strength in proximity and shared purpose. The morning brought clear skies, and Diana's resolve, hardened during a sleepless night, to see through what she had begun. Alexander's London townhouse proved to be a magnificent structure in Mayfair, all elegant proportions and refined taste, but he had arranged for Diana to stay in a smaller but equally comfortable house nearby, properly chaperoned by a respectable widow of his acquaintance. "I will not risk your reputation," he explained as he escorted her to her temporary residence. "Society must see that Lady Diana Hartwell has returned under proper circumstances, with all due attention to propriety and decorum." The meetings with solicitors and allies consumed the following days. Diana recounted the circumstances of the accident, described what she had witnessed from her hiding place in the reeds, provided details about her father's concerns in the weeks before his death, and gradually built the testimony that would serve as the final piece of evidence needed to bring her parents' murderers to justice. Throughout it all, Alexander remained present, a steady figure who asked clarifying questions, ensured she was not overwhelmed, and provided silent support through the emotional toll of reliving traumatic memories. One evening, a week after their arrival in London, Alexander invited Diana to dine at his townhouse. a private meal with only his sister, Lady Margaret, as additional company. Diana dressed with care in one of the new gowns Alexander had insisted on commissioning, a deep green silk that brought out the colour of her eyes and made her feel, for the first time in 7 years, like someone other than a schoolmistress in drab woolens. Lady Margaret proved to be a woman of middle years with her brother's grey eyes and a warmth that immediately put Diana at ease. "My brother has spoken of little else but you for 7 years," she confided over dinner. "I had begun to think you were a phantom he had conjured to avoid the matchmaking mamas who pursued him so relentlessly. I am delighted to discover you are real and every bit as remarkable as he described." Diana felt a flush rising to her cheeks. "Your brother is too generous in his assessment," she replied. "I am merely a woman who has survived difficult circumstances." "You are a woman who taught herself to survive, and then chose to dedicate yourself to educating children who had nothing," Margaret corrected gently. "Alexander showed me the letters of recommendation your students' parents wrote when they learned you were leaving. The affection and respect evident in those letters speaks to character, Lady Diana. You have nothing to be modest about." After dinner, Alexander walked Diana through his private gardens. The evening air cool but pleasant, the city sounds muted by high walls and careful landscaping. They moved in comfortable silence until Diana spoke. "Your sister is lovely," she said. "She made me feel genuinely welcome." "Margaret has been my strongest supporter these 7 years," Alexander replied. "When others suggested I was mad to continue searching, she encouraged me to trust my instincts. She will be pleased if you and I find our way to a future together, but she befriended you tonight for your own sake, not merely because I am courting you." Diana stopped walking and turned to face him. "Are you courting me?" she asked quietly. "We have spoken much of allowing such a thing, but we have not defined what it means or where it might lead." Alexander studied her face in the dimming light. "I am courting you," he confirmed. "I am spending time in your company to better know you and to allow you to know me. I am hoping that familiarity will deepen the attachment I already feel and perhaps kindle something similar in you. And I am working toward a future in which I might ask you to marry me, if you come to believe such a union would bring you happiness." The directness of his statement left Diana momentarily breathless. "You move quickly," she managed. 7 years of searching does not feel quick to me," he replied with a slight smile. "But I will move at whatever pace you require, Diana. If you need months or years to be certain of your feelings, I will wait. If you ultimately decide you prefer to remain unmarried or to seek connection elsewhere, I will accept that choice with grace, though not without disappointment." Diana reached for his hand, the gesture becoming natural between them. "I do not need months or years to know that I find your company agreeable and your character admirable," she said carefully. "What I need is time to reclaim my own identity fully before I can consider merging it with someone else's. I need to provide my testimony and see justice done. I need to settle my parents' estate and determine what kind of life I wish to lead as Lady Diana. And I need to be certain that what I feel for you is not merely gratitude for your protection and support during a vulnerable time, but genuine affection based on clear-eyed assessment of who we both are." "That seems eminently reasonable," Alexander agreed. "Shall we say that I will continue to call upon you, to escort you to appropriate social functions as you re-enter society, and to demonstrate through consistent action that my regard is both genuine and lasting, and you will observe, assess, and ultimately determine whether a future together appeals to you?" "Yes," Diana said, relieved by his understanding. "That is exactly what I am asking." Alexander lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her gloved knuckles. "Then that is what we shall do," he said simply. "I have waited 7 years, Diana. I can certainly wait a few months more for you to be certain of your heart." The following weeks brought a whirlwind of activity. Diana provided her formal testimony to the authorities, her words weighted with grief and determination. The evidence Alexander had compiled, combined with her eyewitness account, proved sufficient to bring charges against the men responsible for her parents' deaths. The arrest created a scandal that dominated London society, with Diana's miraculous survival and return adding fuel to the gossip mill. Through it all, Alexander remained a constant presence, shielding her from the most intrusive attention while ensuring she was supported through the emotional difficulty of the legal proceedings. He called upon her daily, escorted her to carefully selected social functions where his presence discouraged overly personal questions, and gradually reintroduced her to the world she had left behind. Diana found, to her surprise, that being Lady Diana again was not as difficult as she had feared. The confidence she had developed as Bridget Shaw, the strength she had cultivated through years of independence, informed how she carried herself in drawing rooms and ballrooms. She was no longer the quiet girl who had poured tea in her father's house, but a woman who had survived tragedy, built a new life, and returned to demand justice. Society did not quite know what to make of her, but there was grudging respect mixed with the curiosity. One evening, at a musicale hosted by Lady Margaret, Diana overheard two matrons discussing her in stage whispers, clearly meant to be heard. 7 years of living as a common schoolmistress, one said with scandalized relish. One wonders what kind of company she kept, and what habits she might have acquired. The Duke of Ravenswood seems unbothered by her unconventional history, the other replied. He has made his interest quite clear. I suppose a wealthy heiress can be forgiven much, even at her age. Diana felt Alexander stiffen beside her, saw him preparing to confront the speakers, but she laid a gentle hand on his arm. Let them talk, she murmured. Their opinions have no bearing on who I am or what I have done. He looked down at her with something like wonder. You have changed, he observed. The Diana I remember would have been wounded by such comments. The Diana you remember had not yet learned that survival requires developing a thicker skin, she replied. Bridget Shaw taught me that my worth is not determined by others' assessment, a lesson Lady Diana is grateful to have learned. Later, as Alexander escorted her to his carriage for the journey back to her temporary residence, he spoke thoughtfully. You integrate the two identities seamlessly, he said. Diana and Bridget are not separate women, but facets of the same person. Yes, she agreed, pleased that he understood. I cannot be only Diana, denying the years I spent as Bridget and the growth that came from that experience. Nor can I be only Bridget, pretending my past and heritage do not exist. I must be both, a synthesis that honors all I have been and am becoming. Alexander handed her into the carriage, then joined her for the short journey through London's evening streets. I love both facets, he said quietly. The lady and the schoolmistress, the survivor and the teacher, the woman of privilege and the woman who understands what it means to have nothing. You are whole in a way that makes you unlike anyone I have ever encountered. Diana felt warmth bloom in her chest at his words. You see me clearly, she said, the observation carrying weight. That is a rare gift, Alexander. Most people see only the title or the scandal, or the unlikeliness of my survival. You see the person beneath all of that. Because I have been looking for 7 years, he replied simply. One develops clear vision when searching that intently. They rode in companionable silence until the carriage stopped before Diana's residence. As Alexander handed her down, he spoke with unusual hesitancy. Diana, the trial concludes next week. Once the verdict is delivered and justice is served, you will be free to determine your future without that weight hanging over you. I wonder if you have given thought to what that future might look like. She understood what he was really asking. I have given it considerable thought, she admitted, but I am not yet ready to speak of it. Ask me again after the verdict, Alexander, when I can answer with full certainty rather than tentative hope. He nodded, accepting her boundary without argument, and escorted her to her door. But before she could enter, he caught her hand. Whatever you decide, he said, know that these months of courting you have been among the happiest of my life. You have exceeded every hope I harbored, during those 7 years of searching, and I am grateful for the opportunity to know you truly, regardless of where it leads." Diana felt tears prick her eyes at the sincerity in his voice. "Thank you," she whispered, "for searching, for believing I lived, for making justice possible, and for seeing me as I am, rather than as society thinks I should be." She rose on her toes and pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek, a gesture both intimate and chaste, before slipping inside and leaving him standing in the doorway with a look of such tender hope that it made her heart ache. The trial concluded with convictions for all parties involved in her parents' murders. Diana attended the final day of proceedings, sitting in the gallery with Alexander beside her and Lady Margaret on her other side, as justice was finally served. When the verdicts were read, she felt something release within her, a burden she had carried for 7 years finally lifted. Her parents were avenged. The men who had stolen her family and forced her into exile would face the consequences of their crimes. It was not enough to erase the loss, but it was something, a closing of a chapter that had remained painfully open. That evening, Alexander called upon Diana in her private sitting room, his expression serious but not unhappy. "It is done," he said simply. "Justice has been served, your inheritance is restored, and you are free to build whatever future you choose. Have you reached any decisions about what that future might hold?" Diana had known this conversation was coming and had spent the past week organizing her thoughts. "I have," she said. "Please sit, and I will explain." They settled across from each other, and Diana took a steadying breath before speaking. "I wish to establish a school," she said, "not in Thornwick, though I will always treasure my time there, but here in London. A school for children whose families cannot afford the education that would open doors for them. I want to use my inheritance to create something lasting, something that honors both Diana, the lady who has resources to share, and Bridget, the teacher who found purpose in education." Alexander's face lit with understanding and approval. "That is a remarkable plan," he said, "and entirely in keeping with who you are. How can I assist?" "I will need guidance in establishing the legal and financial structures," she replied. "I will need to secure property and hire teachers, develop curriculum, and recruit students. It is an ambitious undertaking, and I do not pretend to have all the answers. But it is what I want to do with my restored life, Alexander. Not simply return to being Lady Diana of the drawing rooms and ballrooms, but create something meaningful that allows me to remain connected to the work I love." "I think it is perfect," he said warmly, "and I would be honored to help however I can." He paused, then added carefully, "And is there room in these plans for anything or anyone beyond your school?" Diana felt her pulse quicken. "That depends," she said, "on what that anyone might envision for his own future and whether it could accommodate a wife who intends to remain actively involved in managing a school rather than focusing solely on social obligations and household management." Alexander leaned forward, his eyes intent on hers. The anyone in question has spent 7 years imagining a future in which he shares his life with a woman of intelligence, strength, and purpose. He has no interest in a wife who is merely ornamental, or whose sole function is to host dinner parties and produce heirs. He wants a partner who will challenge him intellectually, who pursues her own interests and passions, who brings her whole self to their union rather than sublimating her identity to his. He reached across the space between them and took her hands in his. "Diana, I have loved you since those dozen conversations 7 years ago, loved you through your absence and your return, loved the memory of who you were, and the reality of who you have become. I love Diana and Bridget both, the lady and the schoolmistress, the survivor and the teacher. If you will have me, I wish to marry you, to support your dreams of establishing a school, to stand beside you as you build a life that honors all facets of who you are. I offer you my name, my protection, my resources, and most of all, my heart, freely given without expectation that you diminish yourself to accommodate me." Diana felt tears, spilling down her cheeks, but they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. I love you, she said, the words emerging with certainty. I did not know it at first, could not distinguish gratitude from affection, obligation from genuine feeling. But over these months of watching how you treat everyone from the lowest servant to the highest peer with equal dignity, of seeing your patience and understanding as I navigated my return to society, of experiencing your unwavering support without any demand for control or submission in return, I have come to love you truly and completely. She gripped his hands tightly. I worried that I was too old, too damaged by what I had endured, too set in my independence to ever be a suitable wife. But you have never treated my age or my past as liabilities. You have never suggested that my desire to continue teaching was inappropriate or that I should abandon my own goals to focus solely on yours. You have seen me, Alexander, truly seen me in all my complexity, and loved me anyway. How could I not love you in return? Alexander drew her to her feet and into his arms, holding her as though she were precious beyond measure. Then marry me, he whispered against her hair. Marry me and let us build a life together that honours both our duties and our hearts. Be my Duchess, but remain yourself, Diana Bridget Hartwell, soon to be Ashford, teacher and lady, survivor and partner, the woman I have searched for, and the woman I will continue to choose every day for the rest of our lives. Yes, Diana said, lifting her face to his. Yes, I will marry you, Alexander, and build that life with you. Their kiss, the first they had shared, was tender and full of promise, a seal on words spoken, and a beginning of all that was to come. When they finally parted, Alexander rested his forehead against hers. 7 years, he murmured. 7 years of searching, and here you are, more wonderful than I ever imagined. I am sorry you had to search so long, Diana said softly. I am not, he replied, because the waiting made finding you all the sweeter, and because I believe we both needed those 7 years to become the people we are now, ready for this partnership. They stood wrapped in each other's arms as the evening deepened into night, two people who had found each other across time and distance, despite all the obstacles that had stood between them. Lady Diana Hartwell had returned from the dead, but she had brought Bridget Shaw with her, a synthesis of identities that made her stronger than she had been as either alone. And Alexander Mowbray, Duke of Ravenswood, had proved that love could be patient and persistent, that 7 years of searching could lead to finding not just the woman he remembered, but someone even more remarkable for having survived and grown through hardship. Their engagement was announced the following week, causing another ripple of gossip through London society. The Duke of Ravenswood, marrying the resurrected Lady Diana Hartwell at their respective ages, both past the first bloom of youth, both choosing partnership based on genuine connection rather than social expectation. Some whispered that it was romantic, others that it was practical, a convenient arrangement between two people of suitable rank who had somehow found themselves still unmarried. But those who attended the wedding 3 months later, held in the chapel at Ravenswood Estate, witnessed something that transcended both romance and practicality. They saw the way the Duke looked at his bride as she walked down the aisle, as though she were the answer to every prayer he had ever offered. They saw the way Lady Diana's face glowed with happiness that had nothing to do with the grandeur of her surroundings or the prestige of her new title. They heard the vows exchanged with depth of feeling that made even the most cynical guests fall silent in recognition that something rare and true was taking place. And they observed, in the months and years that followed, how the new Duchess of Ravenswood did not abandon her plans for a school, but instead established one of the finest institutions in London for children regardless of their family's ability to pay, how she remained actively involved in its management while also fulfilling the social obligations of her position with grace and intelligence. They watched as the Duke supported his wife's endeavours without attempting to control or diminish them, as he attended her school's events with genuine pride, as he consulted her on matters both personal and political, treating her opinions with respect that made it clear he valued her mind as much as her companionship. society eventually accepted what it had initially questioned, that the Duke and Duchess of Ravenswood had formed a partnership based on mutual respect, genuine affection, and shared purpose, that their ages and unconventional history made them not less suitable but more so, bringing to their union a maturity and depth that younger couples often lacked. 10 years after the wedding, on the anniversary of the day Alexander had appeared at the Thornwick schoolhouse in the rain, Diana sat in her private study at Ravenswood Estate, reviewing reports from the school that bore her name. The Diana Hartwell School for Children had grown beyond her initial vision, now serving hundreds of students and employing dozens of teachers, many of them young women Diana had personally trained and mentored. Alexander entered quietly, as he always did when she was working, unwilling to disturb her but wanting to share her space. She looked up and smiled, the expression warm and unguarded in a way that still made his breath catch after a decade of marriage. 10 years, he said, coming to sit beside her. 10 years since I found you again. 10 years since you rescued me, she corrected gently. No, he replied, taking her hand. 10 years since I found you, but you rescued yourself, Diana. You survived the attempt on your life, built a new existence from nothing, and returned to claim justice when the opportunity arose. I merely provided support for what you had already accomplished. Diana leaned into his shoulder, savoring the familiar comfort of his presence. We rescued each other, she said finally. You gave me the courage to reclaim my identity, and I gave you the partnership you had been seeking. We are better together than either of us could have been alone. That, Alexander agreed, pressing a kiss to her temple, is the truest thing I have ever heard. They sat together in comfortable silence, the Duke and Duchess of Ravenswood, the man who had searched for 7 years, and the woman who had survived exile and returned stronger for the experience. Outside, the sound of children's laughter drifted from the school Diana had built, a legacy that would outlive them both. Inside, 2 people who had found each other against all odds savored the simple pleasure of shared presence and enduring love. Dear listener, the story of Diana and Alexander reminds us that being truly seen, being recognized for who we are beneath all the masks we wear, is one of life's greatest gifts. Diana spent 7 years believing herself forgotten, convincing herself that her absence from the world had gone unnoticed and unmourned. How many of us carry similar beliefs, imagining that our true selves are invisible or unworthy of recognition? But Alexander's persistent search, his refusal to accept her loss, his determination to look beyond surfaces until he found the woman he sought, demonstrates a profound truth about love and worth. We are not forgotten. We are not invisible. Someone, somewhere, sees us truly, and that recognition can transform everything. Perhaps you too have hidden parts of yourself, convinced that showing your true complexity would invite rejection rather than acceptance. Perhaps you have believed that your age, your past, your unconventional choices make you unsuitable for love or partnership. But Diana's story teaches us that our experiences, even painful ones, do not diminish our worth but enhance it, adding depth and resilience that make us more, not less, capable of meaningful connection. Tonight, as you rest, know that being fully yourself, embracing both your struggles and your strengths, is not a liability but a gift. The right people will search for you, will recognize you, will love you, not despite your complexity but because of it. You are seen, you are valued, and your story, like Diana's, is still unfolding in ways you cannot yet imagine. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.